I know General Phillips plans to join us shortly, but I think we'll call first on Dr. Gilruth, who is the director of the Manned Spacecraft Center.
Well, I guess all you have to do is look at my face and know that I'm very happy with all the participants. I think this flight is, as you folks know as well as we do, has accomplished all its objectives. I'm very proud of all the members of the recovery forces, the flight controllers, the flight crew, the people who built such a beautiful spacecraft, those who checked it out, and those who designed it. I think the payoff has been today as the first time it's had a chance to show what it could do, and I think that we're all extremely happy, and I guess that sums up how I feel.
George Lowe is doing some real-time data analysis on his cuff just a few minutes before the start of the conference. How did that come out, George?
You know, yesterday afternoon, Wally, or one of the astronauts, said he had a magnificent flying machine. And I guess all of us down on the ground were glad to hear that. And after recovery today and seeing it on the water and seeing the astronaut back on the carrier, I'm inclined to agree with him. We're proud of the spacecraft and what it accomplished. If you want a number, we accomplished 101% of the planned test objectives. I think this is a first in the manned spaceflight program, or perhaps in any space program. We added more into the flight as it progressed. We accomplished everything that we set out to do, added a few more minor objectives, and accomplished those as well. So the official tally is 101%. We had a tremendous workout of the propulsion system with 8 burns. I believe that is more than any space propulsion system has ever been used in any one flight, at least one of this magnitude. Guidance system, of course, performed extremely well. The all-important environmental control system worked without any significant flaws, and I could go down the list, but you've all been here all week and you've seen for yourself how these systems did perform. I think the North American Rockwell Corporation, builder of the spacecraft, deserves a great deal of credit for the work they accomplished during the past year and a half in essentially rebuilding the spacecraft, in working it over, getting it delivered, and its performance, of course, speaks for itself. We're all extremely delighted with what we saw during the past 11 days and the ending this morning, and ready to go to work on the next one.
Now, Lieutenant General Samuel Phillips, who is the program director for Apollo.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry to be a moment late. I stayed in the control center to listen to the President's congratulations to the crew. Apollo 7 goes in my book as a perfect mission. In my experience, this is the first space operation that's accomplished more than 100% of its pre-planned objectives. Our official count is that we accomplished 101% of our intended objectives. The abnormalities that occurred, which were tracked and reported every day, were minimal, and there are only 2 that I think we have significant work to do before we've satisfied ourselves with the readiness for our next mission. These are the AC power bus dropout that was reported, and a full understanding of our battery and charger situation. There is a third that was discussed, namely we have some work to do on our aeromedical harness. We were able during this mission to check the spacecraft in all of its planned and all of its planned modes, or its normal modes of operation, and in all of its backup and redundant modes of operation. I think that either by plan or fortune, we checked everything on that spacecraft and know how it works, including even the uprighting bags at the end of the mission. As you know, we planned the mission on an open-ended basis, laying out the plan of accomplishing objectives so that we expected to complete those objectives at the end of 3 days, the primary objectives. And on the basis of our plan and expectation and my full belief that the mission would be able to go all the way, we were able to capitalize on the success of the mission and to accomplish a very major step in our progress toward the manned lunar landing. It was not a surprise to me that the spacecraft worked. I fully expected that it would. I think a word about where we go from here would be in order. As you know, we announced on the 19th of August that we were establishing Apollo 8 as a manned command and service module flight on Saturn V, number 503, and that the basic mission plan is a Earth orbital mission, which we're prepared to carry out. That we also were preparing and planning to go deeper into space if the progress of the program, by the time that we had to make that decision, would justify our going deeper into space. Accordingly, we have been preparing to conduct missions out to a few thousand miles, or many thousand miles, or circumlunar, or going into lunar orbit. We have much work to do before that decision will be made. We expect that we can accomplish the review of the detailed data, of which we have a great deal now from Apollo 7, complete the ground tests that are necessary to support that decision, complete the checkout and validation of our onboard and ground computer programs, such that we can make that decision by about the middle of November. And it will be our plan to announce that decision as soon as it's made. I think without any desire certainly to take the edge off the tremendous step that Apollo 7 represents, I should remind us all that space flight still involves risks. We have not yet, and I don't believe that we will for some period of time, achieve a status in flying on rockets with complex new spacecraft that anywhere near approaches the state of risk-taking that's involved in climbing aboard and flying in a modern commercial airplane. We had every reason to expect that the Apollo 7 mission would work to perfection as it did. There are, however, risks in this business, and we face them each time we fly. We think we know what the risks are. We understand them. All of the people working in the program and on the equipment and on the mission have done their work thoroughly, and the mission that we just flew speaks for itself in terms of the state of perfection of everybody's accomplishment. That notwithstanding, risks remain in the program, and we all should be mindful of those as we prepare and conduct the upcoming flights in Apollo. I'd conclude by saying that the Apollo program is now in the manned flight phase, which many of us have been working some years to accomplish, that we can see the lunar landing, and I have every confidence myself that the progress of our missions will let us accomplish that by the end of next year.
Thank you very much, General. Your questions, gentlemen, ladies? Yep.
some of the mundane things like some official figures on your retro fire time, splashdown time, distance from target?
Probably not for me. The retro fire was all done just about as we discussed yesterday. I didn't bring over that whole list of numbers today, but it was just about as we had told you yesterday. Relative to where we landed from the carrier, there were some confusing reports to me anyway. 7.5 miles is the latest estimate that we have from the carrier at specified. Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean that's the missed distance, however.
No. I think Ed, the transcript will pretty much reflect those times. Bill Hines, third row.
I asked this question of Dr. Gilruth as much for guidance on future missions as for information about this past one. There were a number of times during this flight, I didn't keep actual count of them, when there were conflicts of opinion or decision-making between the ground and the spacecraft. On some occasions when the command pilot simply overrode or ignored instructions that he received from the ground. The question has arisen now, who's in charge here? How are these conflicts resolved and all that? I'm not trying to stir up a fight, I'm just trying to get that information.
Bill, I think it's quite clear that the ground is in charge. However, the commander is on the scene, and if he has information that the ground doesn't have, in his opinion, he should not follow exactly the ground instructions. It is his responsibility to conduct the maneuver or the act that's upcoming in the way that gives minimum risk to the spacecraft and the crew. And I think this is the way it has to be.
Following.
To follow that question up, then, this does not amount in any sense to insubordination when the command pilot overrides instructions from the ground. Is that correct?
It does not involve insubordination. It's I think traditional that the man on the scene, if in his judgment, he knows something that the people on the ground don't know. It's really his responsibility to conduct the maneuver, the act, in the way that he thinks is in the best interests of the mission and the crew.
I have one other question that I'd like to ask. I guess Deke Slayton or Glenn Lunny, one or the other. In what suit configuration did these people come down? With the helmets on or off? And what, for Dr. Berry, what effects, if any, did the repressurization have?
As far as the configuration, Bill, they came in with the helmets off. They tried to put the helmets on earlier in the day, which you may have heard, and decided that they could not clear their nose with the helmet on. Therefore, they elected to stow them, and that was the configuration they entered in.
Bill, as far as the effect of the pressurization, we don't really know that at the present time. I know nothing more than the fact that the crew looked good as they got out of the helicopters, but at the moment we're still awaiting a call from sick bay. I may get that before this conference is over, and if not, we'll give it to you later in the day.
Right down here, 6, Lewis.
I suppose this question should be addressed to Dr. Berry. On the next mission and on succeeding missions, which involve a stay time of 7 or 8 days on the flight, is there any disposition on your part to recommend that the crew be isolated before the mission to avoid this head cold situation or other kinds of infection?
Well, Dick, this is something we've considered a number of times, starting back with the first long-duration flights in Gemini, and it's impossible operationally to totally isolate a crew and fly a mission. It just can't be done, a real, true isolation. Now, there are things that can be done, and you can do things about limiting contacts and that sort of thing. And we have continually looked at this, and we are looking at it again about what can be done practically, and I'm sure that we'll have a situation worked out that will be best for us to follow as we go on in missions of this duration, starting with the next flight.
And also asked Doctor, whether there will be any special effort to analyze the organisms in this infection, whether they may be any different than what might have been expected. This has been a very long head cold.
Yes, Dick, we have a program that started, as you know, pre-flight, and this will be continued post-flight. There are samples being taken right now. These will be followed up. It'll be for both bacteria and for the viruses. And we should have some idea about what we're dealing with here as a result of that, and what organisms have changed as a result of the flight itself.
With respect to the 101% of the mission objectives accomplished, what was the 1% above the 100% that you accomplished?
I'm not sure whether I have a detailed listing of that. I know that we added toward the end of the mission another thermal balance passive thermal control experiment. I believe we had more landmark sightings at the end of the mission, and that is probably it.
We also got fully operational use of the 3 uprighting bags, which were
Question for Deke Slayton, Glenn Lunny, or both. We've talked about the performance of the machine till now, and obviously the crew performed a 101% successful mission. But I wonder if you could evaluate for us the crew performance through the flight as you see it.
You're talking about the way the crew performed the flight plan specifically? I think the best information we have right this minute is that they essentially performed everything as planned. All the burns went exceptionally well, as you're aware of. Photography, there again, we won't be able to evaluate how good that was until it's developed, but at least we shot off everything that we intended to shoot. I think all the mission objectives were accomplished, and they were accomplished well. I think they had a real good spacecraft to work with. Yes.
Yes.
Mark Bloom back here. And Mike may be dead, though.
In view of my hearing going, mission described as perfect.
Like that spacecraft, what could be learned from Apollo 8 as an Earth orbital mission, and also what could be learned as a circumlunar, and what could be learned as a lunar orbit?
Well, that's a long order. We are very interested in continuing the evaluation of the spacecraft systems, of course, and in Earth orbit we could do a number of things such as simulating the lunar timelines, the performance of the SPS engine, those kinds of times, and those kinds of lengths of burns. We could do a lot of things in going to higher apogees in terms of G&M evaluation, landmark tracking, deep space navigation. Now, if we go deeper into space, then the whole evaluation of the spacecraft systems in that kind of environment, the communications at long ranges from the Earth, our ability to determine the track of the spacecraft, its trajectory, its orbit around the moon, all of those things are forthcoming in all of the missions we have planned in the future.
That mic is out. Let's work with this one now. Go ahead.
Glenn Lunny, in view of Captain Shiraz's resistance to certain experiments given to him, do you modify your views now in that regard? Are you going to keep this up, or what's going to happen on future flights?
Keep what up?
Are you going to crank in new experiments as you go in view of the resistance on certain ones which came up in the past week?
No, well, we can't approach the problem that way. What we did in this flight was to add and modify the tests that we had planned as we saw opportunities develop during the course of the flight. We will be required to continue to do that kind of work. As minimum as possible, however, we just can't ignore opportunities to learn more about the vehicles that we're flying. And we will continue to do that kind of thing.
Mark? Still, I'll pick him up for a minute.
What would you learn in Earth orbit that you wouldn't learn in circumlunar? What would you learn in Earth orbit you wouldn't learn in circumlunar? I mean moon orbit, not Earth orbit.
Well, so would you say it again then, please?
I'm sorry. What would you learn in moon orbit that you would not learn in circumlunar? What would be the advantage of moon orbit?
Well, the advantage of lunar orbit would be that we would be able to determine our ability to in fact, determine the exact lunar orbit we were in at the conditions that we planned to fly the Apollo spacecraft. The whole navigation scheme, the whole timeline associated with the crew performance, the environmental characteristics of the spacecraft around the moon. All of these things would have to do with navigation and guidance communication systems, which must be evaluated in that environment, and that can only be done in orbit around the moon.
Down here, Tom.
Did the pilots perform the Valsalva motion coming down? Is this why we didn't hear anything from them on the way down the last 20,000 feet?
I don't know yet.
We don't know that.
We had no communications with them during that period.
They were talking to the recovery forces, to the carrier, but we couldn't copy it here.
There were indications early in the flight that they had quite a bit of trouble trying to navigate sight stars and so on because of the light scattered by the Earth's atmosphere. Have you had any chance to evaluate this at this point, and if so, how do you feel about how it might work coming back from the moon, which I gather is the most critical use of it?
Well, the problem that we had early in the flight was that at one point we dumped some water immediately previous to trying to take some sightings of the S-4B with the sextant. Don Isley pointed out the difficulty of doing that, and that you get a number of targets out in front of the sextant. From that point on, we avoided doing that and had really no subsequent problem with tracking with the optics as we wanted to.
Let me add to that. The analysis I've seen is that we were able to see stars exactly as we had predicted we would be able to see them.
As a matter of fact, I think we're more than pleased with the GNN navigation capability on board, both from star sightings and landmark tracking. We were able to do auto tracking with the GNN, and that was performed very well, both by the crew and the spacecraft.
Mac.
Just to continue on the guidance and navigation system, of course, it's been doing a lot of other things too, controlling rocket firings, and we've also had these IMU alignments. And what can we say on that?
It worked just great. Did that just fine.
So again, just to repeat this colloquy of before, there really hasn't been anything at all in there. There's been no problems that you've noticed, anything out of line, no anomalies.
That's correct. As near as we can tell, that system performed essentially perfectly.
Did the automatic guidance and navigation system control the re-entry today?
That was the plan. I have not heard from the crew that was not done, so I assume that it was.
Would an 18 or 20 mile error be considered working fine? Or
We don't know that there was an 18 or 20 mile error. The only number we have is that we were about 7.5 miles from the carrier at splash now. Exactly where the carrier was and exactly how accurate that is, etc., remains to be determined.
I think we ought to say that when he came out of blackout and we received data, he was in auto, which indicates he was on the GNN. And further, if we believe the inertial measuring unit in the spacecraft, the last ranges we had were about 3 miles downrange and about 2.7 miles cross range. And I have every indication to believe, since I'm proud of that computer, that it was probably right.
I would like to know if the distance covered by the Apollo 7 and the time or duration of the flight compares favorably to a future, to the duration of the flight and the distance of a round trip to the moon.
Yes, you could go to the moon and back in 10.7 days, easily.
So you could say that you have also accomplished a test of endurance of the Apollo 7 in a flight to and from the moon.
You could say that? That's correct.
Art.
An interesting number I could add to that, we got in this flight more than a third of the total man-hours in space that we accomplished in the entire Gemini program. So we did a third as many man-hours in one flight here as we did in the 10 Gemini flights. And for a first flight, that's quite an accomplishment.
Could someone tick off the milestones that will now follow leading up to this decision as to what Apollo 8 will do?
Well, I'm not prepared here to tick off each of the events that will occur. We have a design certification review that we must yet accomplish. We have, as I've said, some ground testing to be completed and certified. We have to complete the review of the essential data that's available to us now from the Apollo 7 mission. Beg your pardon?
How long will that review take, that particular review?
Well, we're committed to accomplishing all of these events so that we can make the decision on the extent of the Apollo 8 mission by about the middle of November. And we're busily working day after day to work off each of these items, and I'm sure we will complete that work by the middle of November and promptly announce that decision.
We've got some questions in Florida. Let's get down there now if the switch will work.
Yeah, this Sanders Lamont at the Cape. One question for General Phillips. It's a minor 14-part question. Could you run down the steps between now and a lunar mission, and as far as Apollo 8, 9, 10, 11, so forth go? And in that, would you tell us whether it is possible, and I'm just asking if it's possible, that 10 or 11 could be the first lunar landing attempt? And one more part, is there any plan to send a command and service and lunar module into moon orbit without attempting a landing at this time?
Well, there's several parts to that question.
Okay, I'll repeat the question.
I think I have.
General Phillips, would you run down the plans between now and a lunar landing attempt, going through the Apollo numbers as you see them now? And as part of that, would you tell us if you think it is possible that a lunar landing could come as early as 10 or 11?
As we've reported on previous occasions, we have planned and are preparing for a series of mission types to reach a state of maturity with this total space system to attempt the initial lunar landing. These mission types we've given letters, and the C prime mission is the letter we've designated for Apollo 8. That's a command and service module operations mission flying on a Saturn V. The D mission, which follows, which we're making ready now, is a complete spacecraft. The command service module and the lunar module put into Earth orbit on a Saturn V. And then over a period of days, that complete spacecraft is put through many tests and maneuvers to evaluate how the lunar module works, how the command service module and the lunar module work together, and how well the flight crew and the whole ground operation can, in fact, control that operation. We have been planning and preparing for the mission type to follow that as an E-type mission, which again takes the whole spacecraft combination into Earth orbit, but this time to a higher apogee of some 4,000 or so miles, giving us some additional data in operations a little deeper into space and maneuvers involved in that process. We've also been preparing and planning for what we call an F-type mission, which takes the whole spacecraft combination, command service module and lunar module, to the moon, into lunar orbit, descends the lunar module but does not land, re-rendezvous, and then the command and service modules come back home. So the F is a mission to lunar orbit with a descent and not a landing. And the G mission is the letter we've given to the lunar landing itself. Now, we have I think, carefully constructed our program so that we can exercise among the options of those mission types the choice that each week and each mission will tell us to make. Our plans at the present time involve flying each of those mission types, with the exception that we have not yet made a decision between an F or a G. In other words, a trip to the moon with a whole spacecraft versus the full landing. We firmly expect to fly the C prime mission and the D mission. Beyond the D mission, we have the options of E, F, or G. Today, I would by no means commit to a lunar mission after D. Absolutely rule it out as a decision that could be made today. I believe that it is extremely unlikely that the mission sequence would see us going from a D to from the Earth orbital spacecraft mission to a lunar landing mission. I'd like to emphasize that we continually evaluate what's the best option to choose to make the progress onto the lunar landing. Today, I would absolutely rule out such a decision, and I consider it very unlikely, even as the future events and missions unfold. So, to answer your question about Apollo 10, I absolutely would rule it out today. Consider it very unlikely that Apollo 10 would be the lunar landing mission. I think each succeeding mission has an increasing probability of being the one that will make the trip.
Okay.
A question for Dr. Berry from Louis Desroches of the French news agency here at the Cape. Chuck, if the astronauts had developed their code before liftoff instead of after, would you have let them go? And if not, would the mission have been delayed by how long?
Louis, I think I understood that question to be, if they had a code before liftoff, would we have let them go? And the answer to that is no. And then I think there was something about, would that have delayed the mission?
And how long?
How long would it have delayed the mission? Well, I guess that's a question Deke and I both would have to answer. It depends on whether you want to go with the prime crew or go to the backup crew.
It's a decision you have to make in real time as to whether you're going to hold or whether you switch in the backup crew.
This is B.K. Thomas, Aviation Week. A question for General Phillips. General, with the fine performance of the spacecraft on this flight and the duration equivalent to or exceeding that you would have on a lunar orbit flight, could you be more specific in some of the additional testing that you would like to see accomplished before you make this decision on whether Apollo 8 might be lunar orbit? Over.
Well, we have a small number of tests remaining to validate the Apollo spacecraft for the lunar return, and a small number of tests remaining to complete the validation of the Saturn V for that mission. The tests remaining are principally structural, and there's nothing, I don't expect anything to arise in those tests that would indicate that we're not in completely good shape, but we have those tests to complete and the results to certify. There is some testing that started as Apollo 7 got underway relating to the AC system, which I mentioned before, and to the battery and charger system, which we have some more work to do to completely satisfy that.
Okay.
One brief question, I hope for General Phillips. Could someone there please assure us that on Apollo 8 and subsequent missions, that mission commentary will continue until the time the astronauts are recovered and back on board? We trust Walter Cronkite, but it's pretty bad when that's the only commentary we can get.
Could I refer that to one of our public affairs experts?
I'm not sure Walter appreciates your statement, but I thought we tried to continue today until the helicopter landed, and it was purely visible what was going on at that point. That's when we shut down the control center. And while we've been talking, the spacecraft was hoisted aboard, and I'm waiting an exact time, which we're going to get any moment. Another question in the Cape? No more than the Cape. Any here? Sir?
I think Chris has something to say.
All right. Craig?
Well, I want to point out that we've said a lot about the network this morning, about the spacecraft this morning. I'd like to say that we also had a relatively new network that was performing for its first time in this flight, and that it certainly performed as outstanding as the spacecraft did in bringing back all of that data. It was performed beautifully, the communications were excellent, and we can't say too much praise for it.
Right down here.
For Dr. Berry, there was a report that Wally might have picked up that coal going dove hunting. Are trips like that at the Cape right before the mission out?
You want to answer that?
Yeah, they're not out. I went dove hunting with him and I didn't get a cold. I don't think that's got a thing to do with it.
Tom, for whatever it's worth, I went dove hunting with him and I got a cold, a real Lulu.
Yeah, if you add all those percentages up, you come out with no answer. But what I think we have to say is that there's no indication at all. In fact, I really, very honestly, don't think that that dove hunting episode had anything to do with the cold, because we had exposure to the other two people prior to that time. And I think that had little to do with this particular instance.
Yeah, Pete Bellman.
General Phillips, could you define a little more detail what you meant by additional structural testing needed on the spacecraft?
Well, at my last check, we had yet to complete a structural test of a spacecraft launch vehicle joint, which is one of the design conditions that we have to satisfy in the Saturn V Apollo combination. Our schedules call for that test to be completed right around the first part of November, and I think our structural testing is meeting that schedule. We have been doing tests of the structural tests of the second stage of the Saturn V in facilities in California and also at Huntsville to complete the certification of that structure, which is a lighter weight structure. And at least as of a few days ago when I was in the office, we weren't scheduled to complete all of that testing and to certify it until the early part of November. So I would expect that it will be around the end of the first week in November that we can meet to assess and sign off on the completion of those structural tests.
Also, did I understand you to indicate that concerning the AC system, that you had some prior to flight information?
No.
That there were some glitches?
No.
Okay.
Well, I didn't say that there were prior to flight indications. What I said was that as soon as the anomalous condition occurred in flight, where there was an AC bus dropout, George Lowe and the North American Rockwell Company immediately proceeded to set up a test setup to evaluate and identify the details of that problem. Perhaps George could comment further on that.
We did try to duplicate the condition both on spacecraft 106, which is in Downey during its final checkout, and at Beech Aircraft Company, which makes a cryogenic tank, since, as we told you previously, we suspected that the turning off of the fans inside the cryogenic oxygen tank had something to do with the loss of AC power. Neither of these tests caused the kind of over voltage that would have caused the AC power to turn off. So as of today, we still don't have detailed knowledge as to what the problem was. We will, of course, get part of the hardware back with Spacecraft 101, not the Kaya tanks and the fans because they're in the service module, but we will get the inverters and the over voltage sensors back, and we'll perform some tests as soon as we get that back to try to tie it down.
Al?
Do you have any idea how long the spacecraft was in this apex down position, and could you state briefly what they had to do to inflate those balloons or bags?
It normally takes about somewhere between 7 and 10 minutes to upright to get all 3 bags inflated. It's probable that it may have come up even quicker than that because 2 bags can do the job many times.
Is this an automatic thing? They push a button or something to inflate the bags? Or?
Beg your pardon?
How do they inflate the bags?
It's manually initiated.
I think it's worth pointing out, everybody may not know it, but this spacecraft does have 2 stable conditions in the water, and it is stable when it's apex down, or it's stable when it's heat shield down. And under various detailed conditions of landing and winds, it is not uncommon for the spacecraft to come to rest in the stable 2 position, which is apex down, and that's why they've designed into it the uprighting capability so it can be turned over with the heat shield down.
But does that hamper communications when the apex is down?
Yes.
Huh?
The antennas are in the water.
Roy?
A lot of nice things have been said this morning. I'd like to compliment that Public Affairs Office for the mission commentary that was very much on the ball all the way through the flight and that gave us
like your steak,
rather keen insight to what was going on. Now, one of the things that was of particular note was the onboard television, which we appreciated very much. It gave us our first look into space proper. And I wonder if this is part of your plan for Apollo 8 and the follow-on missions, and if it is, what can we expect from those television transmissions? I'm not talking production when I say that. I'm looking more at picture quality and at longer range what you expect.
We have a television camera of the same type that Shirov flew on the stowage list for Apollo 8. I'm not conversant at the moment with the timeline plan for its usage, but it will be used in the Apollo 8 mission, whatever kind of mission it flies. We also have on our stowage list for the lunar module flights a television camera which is ultimately intended for use on the lunar surface.
The second part of that question actually dealt with at range. If you do go into deep space, what kind of reception would you expect? Can you get a high bit rate so that you could get a picture back, say, from the vicinity of the moon?
I'd like to refer that, or ask if anybody here is more expert on what we can expect than I am.
The ranges that we expect are lunar ranges, assuming that we get the circuit margins and the performance of the spacecraft systems as well as the high-gain antenna. You must have the high-gain antenna on the service module to get TV back to Earth from lunar distance. On the lunar surface, it requires the high-gain antenna on the lunar module, or possibly the use of the larger dishes here on Earth than we have. We only have one at Goldstone, as you know, the 210-foot dish, or the use of an erectable antenna. That's probably touch and go. We need to understand better when we get there what the margins are going to be to give you a full picture of what the lunar television will be.
We've got some numbers here on aiming points and splash points which may be of interest. Aim point, and these are going to be PAO unofficial numbers until the data is released. 27 degrees, 38 minutes north, 64 degrees, 10 minutes west. That's the aim point. Splash point, 27 degrees, 32.5 minutes north, 64 degrees, 4 minutes west, which is an 8 nautical mile miss from the aim point. Time of splash, 7:11:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight. Time spacecraft hoisted out of the water, 8:52, and it was held on the crane or the sling for about 7 minutes, and it was put on the deck at 8:59, both Eastern Daylight time. Another question back there.
Dr. Berry, can we expect some information later on today on the general condition of the astronauts, and in particular what they experienced on their descent in reference to their sinus and ear condition?
Yes, I think we can do that later today. I told Paul, and I think I told some of you yesterday, that we probably wouldn't have any real information about that until later this morning. So sometime early afternoon, we'd be glad to give you a quick summary of where we are. At the moment, I could say that we have received word that we certainly didn't have any ruptured eardrums at any rate.
How will you put out that information?
We'll have it available in the news center. I imagine, Chuck, it'll be at least early this afternoon, don't you think, before you get your phone call through? But thank you very much. We hope you didn't...
Can I say something about your numbers, Mr. Haney?
Yes, sir.
I don't agree with your mathematics, number one, and number two, that just because that's where they said they picked it up is not necessarily what the miss distance is.
Oh, I'm sorry. What I was giving you was an 8 nautical miles from the aiming point. I don't think I said anything about splash. Maybe I did. The second number, yes, the second number is a splash estimate. And it's very unofficial. It's completely non-data, unverified.
We think it's less than that.
Thank you very much.